Do not touch him. The human has contaminated the crown system. Chancellor Adrian Rook's voice carried through the frozen Great Hall as if the ice itself had spoken. Caleb Morgan stood between two palace guards beneath columns of crystal filmed with white frost. Machine oil darkened his palms. His gray engineering uniform looked almost black against the silver floor, and one sleeve still carried the rough patch he had sewn over a burn mark months earlier. Around him, nearly 1,000 nobles, officers, diplomats, and servants remained silent. No one looked toward the lower ventilation displays flashing along the walls. They looked at the human. Caleb looked at the pressure gauge above the eastern door. Oxygen on the servant levels had fallen to 81% of normal and continued dropping. The palace had sealed every exit when the Aurora lattice entered coronation lockdown. Heat had gathered in the throne chamber, then vanished so quickly that breath now drifted through the room in pale clouds. Queen Alara Vance sat above them on a raised platform of glass and cobalt metal. Her blue skin appeared darker beneath the emergency lights. Silver-white hair fell across one shoulder, untouched by the frost collecting around her throne. She wore the unfinished coronation mantle, but no crown. Not yet. Rook turned toward her. Your Majesty, the engineer accessed restricted biological systems and disabled the Royal Climate Network. Palace law permits immediate confinement. Caleb kept his attention on the gauge. You have 4 minutes. A murmur moved through the hall. Rook's expression did not change. You will address the Queen properly. The people below us will not breathe more respectfully if I bow. One guard tightened his grip on Caleb's arm. Caleb did not resist. He nodded toward the eastern wall. The servant levels are isolated from the emergency oxygen reserve. The system is feeding this room first. Rook raised one hand. The palace is protecting the sovereign. The palace is protecting the throne. Caleb looked up at Alara. Those are not the same thing. The silence sharpened. Several nobles turned their faces away as though disrespect could spread through eye contact. Alara did not move. Her violet eyes remained fixed on Caleb, not with anger, but with the stillness of someone hearing a truth she had already begun to fear. Rook approached the pressure display and dismissed the warning with a gesture. The readings are corrupted. The human caused the failure. I froze the network because the next command would have removed oxygen from the lower levels entirely. You admit sabotage. I admit interrupting a bad instruction. Frost cracked across the nearest window. Somewhere below the hall, a mechanical alarm sounded once and stopped. Caleb listened to the pipes behind the walls. No circulation. No backup fans. 3 minutes remained. Alara rose from the throne. Every guard in the chamber straightened. Rook stepped toward the platform. Your Majesty, remain within the protected zone. She descended the first glass step. Caleb noticed how carefully she moved, one hand briefly touching the rail when the floor gravity flickered. The nobles lowered their heads. She passed them without acknowledgement. Rook's voice dropped. The contamination protocol requires distance. Alara continued walking. The guards holding Caleb looked uncertain now. He watched the oxygen gauge fall another point. If you want to help, he said, order them to open the mechanical vents. The command system no longer recognizes her authority, Rook replied. Caleb looked at Alara. Then she should ask why. She stopped several feet away from him. Up close, he could see frost along the edge of her mantle and a thin red mark where a royal biometric cuff had been removed from her wrist. Rook moved between them. Do not touch him. Alara looked past the Chancellor, directly at Caleb. How long? 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Can the lower levels be saved? Yes. And you? Caleb glanced at the guards, then at the locked control doors. That depends on whether this room cares more about evidence or appearances. Alara stepped around Rook. The entire palace seemed to stop breathing as she approached the accused human and slowly opened her arms. 8 hours earlier, Caleb Morgan entered the Aurelian Palace through a service gate no noble ever used. Morning light passed through the upper crystal towers and broke into blue bands across the maintenance yard, but the lower corridor remained cold enough for his breath to show. A palace supervisor handed him a temporary access badge without looking up. Minor thermal imbalance, the supervisor said. Nothing that should interrupt the coronation. Caleb glanced at the wall sensor. 49 degrees Fahrenheit. The official display above it read 68. Your sensor disagrees. The display is certified. Cold pipes do not care about certification. The supervisor gave him the expression reserved for hired labor that had spoken too long. Repair the Western regulation valve and leave the royal allocation untouched. Caleb attached the badge to his patched gray uniform and followed the service line deeper into the palace. The difference grew with every level. In the ceremonial halls, warm air moved through golden vents. In the kitchens, laundry rooms, and staff quarters, workers wore extra layers beneath formal uniforms they were forbidden to alter. A young attendant warmed her hands over a beverage sterilizer when she thought no one was watching. Two custodians shared a portable heating strip near the nursery corridor. No one complained. Coronation Day had rules for everything, including discomfort. Caleb reached the lower nursery and found an elderly palace cook waiting beside a supply cart. She pressed a frozen filter cartridge into his hands. Frost covered its mesh. "This came from the children's room," she said quietly. The vents stopped before dawn. "Did you report it?" 3 times. Response. She looked toward the security camera above them. "The palace says the room is warm." Caleb tested the cartridge. The internal gel had frozen solid at 32 degrees. He checked the local terminal. Temperature normal. Oxygen normal. Heat flow normal. Every reading was false. "Who has override authority?" he asked. "Royal Climate Office." "Who works there?" "People who never come down here." Caleb connected his mechanical reader beneath the terminal, bypassing the polished interface. Raw numbers filled the small screen. The lower levels were losing heat at nearly 9% per hour. The missing energy was not leaking into the exterior. It was being redirected upward. He traced the transfer through 3 hidden relays until the route ended beneath the throne platform. Royal Thermal Reserve. Priority absolute. Caleb read the authorization mark twice. The command carried Queen Alara Vance's biometric signature. He removed the reader and checked the time. 7 hours and 19 minutes remained before the coronation. "How many children use this room?" he asked. 23 today. More families will arrive before the ceremony." Caleb opened his tool case. "Bring every spare filter you have." The cook hesitated. "The supervisor told us not to alter the system." "Then do not alter it." He handed her a portable heater. "Keep people warm while I find out who did." He followed the main conduit through a narrow maintenance tunnel behind the nursery wall. The pipes changed temperature beneath his hand, cold below, warm above. Every valve carried a royal security seal. One had been opened recently, then polished clean. Caleb removed the housing and found a second control layer hidden behind the approved circuit. It did not merely redirect heat. It rewrote the public readings so no warning would appear. His temporary badge should not have allowed access, yet the system opened as if expecting him. A new file appeared on his reader. No sender, no origin, only an old map of the Aurora lattice and 1 line of text. "The signature is real. The command is not." Caleb enlarged the map. A maintenance route ran from the lower levels to the private glass garden beside the royal chambers. He closed his tool case and started walking. Behind him, the nursery vent released 1 weak breath of cold air. Above him, hidden inside the palace walls, a new command began transferring more heat toward the throne. The maintenance route narrowed behind the royal apartments, where polished walls gave way to unfinished metal and exposed heat lines. Caleb followed the warmest pipe until it passed beneath a sealed door marked Private Garden Access. His temporary badge failed. He removed the service panel, turned the mechanical release, and stepped into air that felt almost 20 degrees warmer than the nursery below. The glass garden stretched beneath a curved ceiling filled with pale, morning light. Silver vines climbed crystal frames. Blue flowers opened beside heated pools that sent steam across the floor. Near the central regulator, a cobalt-skinned woman in a simple dark tunic struggled with a metal clasp around her wrist. Her silver-white hair had been tied back without ceremony. No guard stood nearby. No crown identified her. Caleb assumed she belonged to the royal staff. "Do not pull that," he said. She looked up sharply. "You entered a private chamber, and you are about to break a biometric seal. It is already malfunctioning. That does not make pulling harder a repair method." Caleb set down his tool case beside the regulator. "Hand me the narrow torque driver." The woman stared at him. "You are giving me instructions." "Yes. Without knowing who I am. Right now, you are the person standing closest to the tool." For 1 second, surprise crossed her violet eyes. Then she opened the case, selected the wrong driver, and held it out. Caleb shook his head. The narrow one. They appear identical. One costs 12 credits. The other costs 1,200. She exchanged them more carefully. Caleb loosened the wrist clasp and removed a thin control plate from beneath it. The device had been forcing her body temperature data into the Aurora lattice every few seconds. This is not only monitoring you, he said. It is using you as a reference point. Explain. The palace is treating your comfort as the correct temperature for everyone. Her expression changed, though only slightly. That would not account for the false readings below. Caleb looked at her. You know about those? I know reports have been inconsistent. The reports are not inconsistent. They are lying. He moved to the main garden regulator and opened the lower housing. Warm air escaped around his hands. Someone is pulling heat from the service floors and sending it here. The public system says nothing changed. The woman came closer. Who authorized it? Caleb turned the display toward her. Ilara Vance. Royal Biometric Confirmation. She did not react at first. Then her eyes settled on the signature as if it belonged to a stranger. Can signatures be copied? She asked. Not this one. Then the order is valid. The signature is valid. The instruction attached to it is not. Caleb removed a hidden relay and placed it on the floor. A second command layer glowed beneath the approved circuit. Someone used a real authorization to approve something different afterward. She crouched beside him, ignoring the dust that marked her tunic. Can you stop it? Temporarily. Then do so. I need someone to hold the bypass valve at 40 degrees. She reached for it. Caleb adjusted her grip. Not with your thumb over the release. You speak to everyone this way? Only when they are about to vent a pressure line into my face. Together, they turned the valve. Heat shifted through the pipe with a deep metallic hum. The garden temperature fell by 3 degrees. Somewhere far below, the nursery vents began receiving warm air again. The woman watched the flow indicator rise. You restored the lower level before protecting the royal chambers. The royal chambers were already warm. You did not ask permission. Caleb resealed the housing. Cold children are not an administrative question. She looked at the signature again. Whoever approved the original system may not have understood what it could become. Then they should understand now. And if the mistake carries their name? Caleb closed his tool case. A name does not repair damage. The woman stood very still beside the cooling flowers. Can a person still be trusted after such a mistake? He met her gaze. That depends on what they do after someone shows them the truth. Footsteps sounded beyond the garden doors. Guards. Several of them. The woman looked toward the entrance, then back at Caleb. You should know who you have been speaking to. The doors opened, and every guard lowered their head. Caleb followed their gaze to the woman beside the broken regulator. Your Majesty, the captain said. Caleb looked at the royal signature on his reader, then at Queen Ilara Vance, standing in a worker's tunic with machine dust on her hands. The guards remained bowed until Ilara raised one hand. Leave us. The captain hesitated. Your Majesty, the Coronation Council requested that you remain within the royal wing. The council requested many things. Her violet eyes moved to Caleb's reader. This is the first request that may keep children warm. The guards withdrew, though none looked pleased to leave their queen alone with a human engineer holding an opened royal control plate. Caleb closed his tool case. You knew something was wrong. I knew the reports contradicted one another. That usually means someone is lying. In a palace, it can also mean everyone is lying politely. Ilara removed the damaged biometric cuff and placed it beside the regulator. Without the device, the garden vents stopped following her body temperature. Warm air no longer gathered around her. For the first time, she seemed to feel the cold spreading upward from the lower floors. Show me, she said. Caleb led her back through the maintenance passage. The guards followed at a distance despite her order, their boots quiet on the metal grating. Ilara wore no mantle, only the dark tunic marked with dust from the valve. Workers in the service corridors recognized her immediately. Conversation stopped. Heads lowered. Hands disappeared from heating pipes, as if being cold were a breach of etiquette. Caleb noticed Ilara notice it. Tell them to continue, he said. The nearest guard stiffened. The human does not instruct the queen. Caleb looked at the worker beside a cooling vent. The cold already did. Ilara turned toward the corridor. Continue your work. No one will be punished for keeping warm. No one moved at first. Then an older custodian slowly returned both hands to the pipe. Others followed. The silence remained, but it changed. Caleb opened the nursery door. 23 children sat beneath layered blankets while 2 attendants held portable heaters between their beds. Frost outlined the lower corners of the windows. The elderly cook from before stood beside the failed filter, still waiting. When she saw Alara, she bowed so quickly the heater nearly slipped from her hands. Alara caught it before it fell. The entire room froze more completely than the windows. A queen did not hold staff equipment. A queen did not stand beside a nursery vent and read the temperature herself. 46 degrees Fahrenheit. Alara looked at Caleb. The official report showed 68. The official report was written for people upstairs. He opened the vent housing and installed the spare filter. The system rejected it. Royal priority restriction. Caleb connected his reader and searched for another route. A secondary heat line ran beneath the kitchen and fed the ceremonial flower vault. I can redirect 15%, he said. From where? The coronation gardens. One attendant looked alarmed. Those flowers are required for the procession. Caleb glanced at the children. Then the procession can be less comfortable. Alara placed her hand on the manual authorization plate. The system recognized her blood temperature and opened the transfer control. Do it. Caleb moved the valve. Heat entered the nursery line with a deep mechanical pulse. The vent released one warm breath, then another. Frost softened along the window edges. The children did not cheer. They simply stopped holding their blankets so tightly. Alara watched them as though the quiet relief accused her more clearly than any counsel could. Why not restore my chambers first? She asked. Caleb tightened the housing screws. You have guards. He nodded toward the stacked blankets. They have those. That is not an answer officials usually give me. Officials are paid to preserve their access. And you? I am paid to repair what is broken. Alara crouched beside the vent and held her hand in the returning warmth. My signature opened the first authorization. Yes. Then this began with me. Caleb looked at the hidden relay on his reader. It began with a system designed so one person's comfort could outweigh everyone else's. You are avoiding blame. No, I am separating the mistake from the person who exploited it. Alara rose. A new warning appeared on the reader. Unauthorized inspection detected. Royal Archive access flagged. Someone had noticed them. Caleb showed her the message. Who controls the archive? He asked. Alara's expression cooled before the corridor did. Chancellor Rook. At that moment, every vent in the nursery stopped again. The nursery vents stopped with a soft mechanical click, and the warmth vanished before it could reach the far wall. Caleb checked the reader. The transfer valve had not failed. Someone had closed it remotely using palace-level authority. Alara looked toward the ceiling as if she could see Chancellor Rook through the floors above them. He knows where we are, she said. He knows someone opened the archive. Caleb removed the replacement filter and handed it back to the elderly cook. Keep the portable heaters running. Do not trust the wall display. Alara turned to the guards. No one enters this corridor without my permission. The captain lowered his head. The Chancellor may invoke coronation security. Then he may explain why coronation security requires cold children. She followed Caleb into the oldest section of the palace, where the Aurora lattice had first been built around mechanical pipes instead of royal software. The control room sat behind a rusted service door beneath the eastern tower. Dust covered the consoles. Manual gauges still showed real pressure, temperature, and oxygen levels because no one had updated them enough to teach them how to lie. Caleb switched on a work lamp. Amber light filled the narrow room. Alara stood beside him while he opened the central regulator. This system predates your throne platform, he said. Good. It also predates safety labels. Less good. He handed her a wrench. Hold the coupling while I release the pressure. She took it correctly this time. Caleb noticed. You learned. I was informed one tool costs 1,200 credits. He glanced at her. That was not the lesson. It was the memorable part. The corner of her mouth moved. Then she laughed, quietly and with visible surprise, as though the sound had escaped before palace rules could stop it. Caleb released the pressure. Steam moved through the old pipe in a thin white ribbon. Alara kept the coupling steady until the gauge fell below 20 pounds per square inch. You do not behave differently now that you know who I am, she said. The valve does not behave differently. Most people do. Most people are not holding a wrench. She looked down at the tool in her hand. There are protocols governing how close someone may stand to the sovereign. That sounds inconvenient for repairs. It is inconvenient for everything. Her voice lost the brief warmth of laughter. Every meeting, every doorway, every gesture is measured. Even touch requires council approval. Caleb reached past her for a seal ring, then stopped before his hand crossed her arm. May I? Alara studied him for a moment and stepped aside. Yes. He replaced the worn seal and tightened the housing. That is all the protocol you need. Ask first. It works in most rooms. Not in the Great Hall. Caleb looked at her. Why not? She turned toward the old royal insignia engraved above the console. Because touch there carries legal meaning. Before he could ask more, the floor gravity flickered. Alara lost her footing. Caleb caught her forearm and steadied her against the console. The guards outside drew breath in unison. Alara immediately withdrew, not with anger, but with the reflex of someone trained since childhood to protect distance. You should not do that in public, she said. Caleb released her. Let you fall. Touch me without warning. Then warn gravity. A small smile returned, but only for a second. The console finished rebooting. Raw data appeared across the screen. 2 command layers. The first carried Alara's original authorization for emergency throne stability. The second had been added later, expanding the order to include heat, oxygen, gravity, and every lower service level. The access seal belonged to Chancellor Adrian Rook. Caleb copied the files to a mechanical drive. Alara read the final line twice. In the event of sovereign instability, Emergency Regency Authority transfers automatically. He is not preparing for a system failure, she said. Caleb closed the drive in his palm. He is preparing to call you one. A security alert flashed above the door. Archive breach confirmed. Detention authorization pending. Alara looked toward the corridor. How much time do we have? Caleb checked the old clock above the gauge. 3 hours before the coronation. The door lock engaged from the outside. Then Chancellor Rook's voice entered through the speaker. Your Majesty, step away from the human. Chancellor Rook's voice filled the old control room with practiced calm. Your Majesty, the human has accessed restricted royal systems. Step away from him, and this matter can be contained. Alara looked at the locked door, then at Caleb. Contained, she said. He means hidden. Caleb held the mechanical drive inside his closed fist. The copied files were safe from the palace network, but only while the drive remained outside its reach. Can the door be opened from here? Alara asked. Not electronically. Mechanically. Everything honest eventually becomes mechanical. He removed the lower panel beside the frame. Behind it sat an emergency release wheel, old enough to have been painted over twice. Caleb fitted the wrench into the frozen axle. Rook spoke again. The coronation begins in 3 hours. Your absence will be interpreted as instability. Alara stepped toward the speaker. And locking your queen inside a service room will be interpreted as what? A pause followed. Protective intervention. Caleb pushed against the wrench. The wool did not move. That phrase should concern everyone, he said. Alara took the second handle without being asked. Together they turned. Paint cracked. Metal groaned. The lock released 1/4 inch. You approved the original emergency framework, Caleb said. Yes. What did you think it would do? Alara kept pressure on the wrench. Protect the throne chamber during attack or structural failure. Not drain the lower levels. Never. Then the first signature is yours. And the second is his. Both will matter. The wheel moved another quarter turn. Outside, guards shifted position. Alara lowered her voice. If these files become public, the council will see my medical calibration records. The Aurora lattice was built around my body temperature, heart rhythm, and stress response. Caleb stopped turning. That was not in the command layer. It is beneath it. The system uses me as a living reference. Rook will argue that any failure in the palace proves I am biologically unfit to rule. Caleb looked at the drive in his hand. It could clear him if Rook accused him later. It could also expose every private measure of Alara's body to a hall full of people waiting for weakness. I can separate the command history from the medical archive, he said. Can you do it before the coronation? Not safely. Then keep the drive hidden. That leaves you without evidence. It leaves both of us with a choice. The lock gave way. Caleb opened the door. 4 guards waited in the corridor with Chancellor Rook behind them, dressed in white ceremonial robes that made the dust on Caleb's uniform look almost deliberate. Rook's gaze moved from Alara to the wrench in her hand. Your Majesty, this engineer has manipulated you. Alara set the wrench on the console. He showed me records. Records he altered. Then allow an independent review. After the coronation. Why not now? Rook smiled without warmth. Because a sovereign cannot begin her reign by confessing uncertainty. Caleb stepped into the corridor. Better than beginning it by freezing children. The nearest guard looked at him, then quickly away. Rook extended one hand. Surrender the copied material. Caleb did not move. No, you are a contractor inside royal property. And that is still not an answer to the cold. Rook's expression hardened. Your access is revoked. Caleb's temporary badge went dark against his chest. Every nearby door sealed at once. A warning appeared on the wall. Unauthorized human presence. Alara looked at the guards. He remains under my protection. Rook inclined his head. Until the Coronation Council determines whether your judgment has been compromised. The words were gentle. The threat was not. Caleb understood the design now. Rook did not need to arrest Alara. He only needed her to appear uncertain, emotionally influenced, and unable to control the human beside her. Go to the coronation, Caleb said quietly. Alara turned toward him. You expect me to leave you here? I expect him to trigger the system when the hall is full. And you? Caleb held up the dark badge. I will be where the pipes are. Rook signaled the guards. Two moved toward Caleb. Alara stepped between them. For one dangerous second, no one breathed. Then she looked at Caleb, not as a queen addressing a servant, but as someone making a promise she could not say aloud. Find the mechanical cutoff, she said. Caleb nodded. Find a reason to make the palace listen. As the guards led them in opposite directions, the hidden relay beneath the throne received a new command. Coronation lock scheduled. Oxygen priority absolute. Emergency regency authorization arm. The coronation bells began above Caleb while he crawled through a maintenance tunnel beneath the throne chamber. Each note vibrated through the pipes and sent dust across his sleeves. His temporary badge was dead. Every electronic door had rejected him, and the palace network now marked his presence as hostile. The old mechanical map in his pocket was the only system Rook had not taught to lie. Caleb followed the main heat conduit toward the throne platform. The pipe grew hotter with every yard. That should have been impossible. The lower levels were still cold. Rook was gathering warmth where the cameras could see it. Above him, thousands of guests filled the great hall. Their footsteps became a low thunder through the ceiling. Caleb reached a vertical junction and found the emergency cutoff behind 3 layers of ceremonial plating. The wheel had been removed. In its place sat a royal control module with no manual release. Of course, he whispered. He opened the housing. 2 command lines glowed inside. The first protected the throne chamber. The second waited for a coronation signal. Oxygen priority absolute. Service levels isolated. Regency authorization armed. Caleb checked the pressure gauge mounted on the raw supply line. The lower floors were already falling. He could not remove the command without the network noticing. He could only stop the entire system. Above him, a herald announced Queen Alara Vance. The hall answered with a sound like distant rain as everyone lowered their heads. Caleb connected his mechanical drive to the cutoff module. The palace rejected it. He tried the auxiliary port. Rejected again. Then he found an older copper contact beneath the royal interface, blackened with age. It had no security because it had been built before security became more important than repair. Caleb bridged the contact with the shaft of his wrench. The module opened. A countdown appeared. Coronation seal in 60 seconds. He moved faster. Heat transfer. Oxygen transfer. Gravity stabilization. Door control. Every system linked to the throne. Rook had designed the failure so no single section could be separated. Caleb could freeze the entire lattice or allow the lower floors to suffocate. There was no elegant option, only the correct one. Above, Alara began the oath. Her voice carried faintly through the ventilation shaft. I accept the weight of the crown. The countdown reached 30 seconds. Caleb placed one hand on the mechanical breaker. His reader displayed the result. Palace temperature loss projected. All royal systems suspended. Emergency lighting only. Service level oxygen preserved. Security response immediate. He thought of 23 children beneath blankets. He pulled the breaker. The palace went silent. Every fan stopped at once. The coronation bells died in the middle of a note. Light vanished, then returned in narrow red strips. Cold moved through the great hall as stored heat rushed back into the lower network. Frost spread across the crystal floor above Caleb's head. The throne platform lost power. Doors locked under mechanical safety protocol. Oxygen stabilized in the nursery, kitchens, and servant quarters. Caleb checked the raw gauge. 92%. Safe enough. Then the alarm began. Unauthorized human access. Crown system sabotage. Regency review initiated. He closed the housing and climbed toward the hall. By the time he opened the service hatch, guards were waiting. Rook stood behind them beneath the darkened throne, his white robes untouched by the dust now drifting from the ceiling. There, the Chancellor said, pointing at Caleb. The human has disabled the crown during the sacred oath. Caleb stepped into the frozen hall with the wrench still in his hand. Alara remained beside the powerless throne. She looked at the frost, then at the pressure displays on the walls. The lower floors were breathing again. Rook raised his voice for every guest to hear. This engineer has endangered the sovereign and contaminated the royal network. Under coronation law, emergency regency authority now passes to the Chancellor. A green seal appeared above him. The palace recognized the command. Guards took Caleb by the arms. He did not resist. He watched Alara instead. Rook approached the throne and lowered his voice. Sit down, Your Majesty. Any further action will confirm impaired judgment. Alara looked at Caleb across the frozen distance. He gave one small nod toward the oxygen display. The number held steady. That was enough. Rook turned to the court. The accused will be judged immediately. As Caleb was brought to the center of the hall, frost gathered along his boots. The crown had lost its warmth. The people below had kept their air. And for the first time, everyone in the palace could see which sacrifice the system had been designed to prefer. Chancellor Rook stood beneath the emergency regency seal while the great hall waited for him to define the truth. Caleb Morgan, he said, you entered restricted systems, disabled the Aurora lattice, interrupted the coronation, and placed the sovereign at risk. Caleb remained between the guards, oil still dark on his hands. I stopped the lower levels from losing oxygen. Rook lifted one hand, and an edited system record appeared above the frozen floor. The display showed Caleb accessing the network, bridging the mechanical cutoff, and pulling the breaker. It did not show the hidden command draining air from the service levels. The evidence is clear, Rook said. The human acted alone. Caleb looked toward the wall gauge. The lower floors remained at 92%. Children, cooks, custodians, and attendants were still breathing. That mattered more than the room believing him. Rook turned toward Alara. Your Majesty, confirm that you did not authorize this sabotage. Alara remained beside the powerless throne. Her coronation mantle gathered frost along the hem. I authorized an investigation. An investigation is not permission to disable the crown. The crown was endangering my people. A murmur moved through the court. Rook's expression tightened. You are relying on the judgment of an outside contractor who accessed your private biological archive. Caleb saw Alara's hand close at her side. Rook had chosen the threat carefully. If Caleb opened the mechanical drive, the command history would prove the Chancellor's alterations, but the same archive contained Alara's heart rhythm, stress response, temperature cycle, and medical calibration records. The court would see everything the palace had measured without her consent. Rook faced Caleb. Present your copied files, and this court will review your claim. Caleb held the drive in his palm. No. The nobles stirred. You refuse to provide evidence? Rook asked. I refuse to expose records that are not mine. Those records concern the crown. They concern her. Caleb looked at Alara. Her privacy is not my defense. Silence crossed the hall more completely than the cold. Rook stepped closer. Then you accept responsibility. For pulling the breaker, yes. And for contaminating the royal system? Pressure does not recognize contamination. It recognizes obstruction. Rook turned to the guards. Remove him. Alara descended from the throne platform. Every eye followed her. Rook moved into her path. Your Majesty, remain within the protected zone. There is no protected zone, she said. Only a room that was kept warm by making others cold. She continued toward Caleb. The guards holding him looked to Rook for instruction. Do not touch him, the Chancellor warned. Alara stopped directly before Caleb. Up close, he could see that her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the temperature. You knew what the drive contained, she said. Yes. You could have saved yourself. Not by turning you into evidence. Something changed in her face. Not softness. Decision. She opened her arms and stepped forward. Caleb had only enough time to release the drive before Alara embraced him. Her hands closed across the back of his patched uniform. His arms remained at his sides for one stunned second before he understood that she was not asking to be held above the room. She was choosing to stand inside his accusation. The palace froze. Nobles stopped breathing. Guards lowered their hands. Even Rook lost the calm shape of his expression. A deep tone moved through the powerless throne. Ancient symbols illuminated beneath the frost. Crown shelter recognized. Shared testimony invoked. Sovereign liability accepted. Caleb looked over Alara's shoulder as the Aurora lattice awakened in a mode no one had used for centuries. The system identified both heart rhythms and opened the sealed archive automatically. Alara released him but remained beside him. The original command history appeared above the hall. Her first authorization showed emergency, throne stability only. Beneath it, Rook's later revisions expanded the order to heat, oxygen, gravity, and regency control. Timestamps. Access seals. Deleted warnings. Every alteration became visible. The court watched the truth assemble itself line by line. Rook reached for the control panel, but the ancient law had removed his access. Alara looked at him across the frozen floor. You told this palace the human contaminated the crown, she said. He only showed me where the corruption entered. The regency seal above Rook faded. The guards beside Caleb stepped away. Heat had not yet returned to the hall, but far below, the service vents began moving warm air through the nursery. Caleb heard it through the pipes before anyone else did. Alara heard nothing mechanical. She only saw the relief on his face and understood that even now, he was still listening for the people beneath them. 1 month later, every level of the Aurelian Palace displayed its own temperature, oxygen supply, and power allocation on public glass panels. The numbers could no longer be hidden behind royal language. Servants, engineers, and residents could see every change as it happened, and any worker could stop an order that placed a populated level at risk. The ceremonial gardens still bloomed, but not at the expense of the nursery. The throne chamber remained warm, but never warmer than the kitchens below. Chancellor Rook awaited a public tribunal, and the archive of his alterations had been copied beyond the palace before anyone could erase it. Caleb Morgan considered that a better security system than any lock. He stood inside the private glass garden with both hands inside an open regulator housing. The blue flowers along the wall had survived the freeze. Their petals opened beneath ordinary heat, not royal priority. On the workbench behind him rested a formal appointment case, trimmed in silver. Caleb had already refused the estate, the ceremonial uniform, and the title of Crown Engineer. Queen Alara had returned with a revised offer. Independent Palace Systems Advocate, she said from the doorway. Caleb looked over his shoulder. She wore a simple dark coat instead of a mantle. No guards followed her. No crown rested in her silver-white hair. That sounds longer than engineer. It also gives you authority to suspend any palace command that threatens civilian safety, including yours, especially mine. Caleb wiped machine oil from his fingers and opened the case. The document contained 3 protections he had requested: public access to life support records, legal protection for workers who reported false data, and independent review of royal overrides. He read the final line twice. You accepted all of it. You were very specific. Specificity keeps people alive. Alara placed a narrow wrench beside the open regulator. Then teach me what this does. Caleb handed it back to her. You brought the wrong size. She examined it. They appear identical. One opens the pressure housing. The other damages it expensively. I remember that lesson. She selected the correct tool and loosened the outer seal. Warm vapor escaped with a soft hiss. Caleb adjusted the gauge while she held the coupling steady. Her grip no longer covered the release. You learned, he said. I was trained by a man who does not bow. The pipe never asked. The regulator settled at 18 pounds per square inch. Across the garden, heat began flowing downward through the restored network. Alara watched the public display beside the door. Nursery level, 69 degrees Fahrenheit. Oxygen, 100%. The court still talks about the embrace, she said. Caleb tightened the final seal. The court talks because most of them do not repair anything. Do you know what it meant? He looked at her. I know it forced the palace to hear the evidence. That was the law. You are asking something else. Alara rested one hand on the workbench. Crown Shelter meant I accepted your testimony as my own. If you had been condemned, I would have shared the judgment. Caleb studied the faint machine dust on her blue fingers. You knew that before you stepped down from the throne. Yes. I did not. I know. He closed the regulator housing. Below them, the lights of the servant levels came on in steady rows beneath the glass floor. I only knew you were the first person in that room willing to share the cold, he said. Alara looked down at the restored lights. Then she moved beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, but without ceremony or witnesses. The palace had feared the ancient law carried in her arms. The human had only recognized a woman who refused to let him stand alone.